Hello, my lovely Reylo community. This is Squirrely Girly, or you could just call me Emily. That's my name. I hope you guys are all doing well these days. I think it's been quite a while since the movie The Rise of Skywalker came out, and I have to say I was really disappointed with this film. And I kind of disappeared for a while offline because I just didn't want to talk about it. It just made me really upset. I just wanted to forget that the film ever happened. And in some ways I kind of still do kind of just, delete that movie from my brain, or at least I try. Because after I left that theater, I just felt super crushed and depressed. And I don't know about you, but I felt like I wanted to throw up because I was just that disgusted and disappointed with what happened in this film. But anyway, I'm not really here to talk about my disappointment in Tross, obviously. I think a lot of other fans have done a better conversation as to why it was so disappointing. So I'm not going to focus on that, but what I want to focus on in this video is basically what I did in the past couple months to help me sort of heal and get over the disappointment of Tross. And I probably won't ever be satisfied with it, but there's other ways that I can kind of distract my mind and find something maybe better to replace that disappointment. But anyways, so I just wanted to have I wanted to introduce something that really helped my healing process after that disappointment. And I actually found it in Korean dramas. And I don't know if any of you guys watch Korean dramas, but recently they've been making some really great shows, and I'm sad that I've been missing out on a lot of them because I've known about Korean dramas for a while, but I'm not going to go into too much detail of why I didn't actually start watching them earlier, but I think I'd only watched maybe one other show ever, but I finally gave one Korean drama show a chance, and I completely fell in love with it, and it was just, it was fantastic. And after I watched, when I watched this show that really captured my heart, I was really interested to see what else Korea has made in the past that would have been really good, that would have filled my soul. And I looked up a list, and I've watched quite a few actually Korean dramas recently. But there's one show that really stuck out to me in terms of like how similar it was to Reylo, and it actually helped me heal quite a bit from that massive disappointment from The Rise of Skywalker. And that's the movie, or not the movie, but that's the show that I really want to discuss in this video, because I feel like if you're a fan of Reylo, you've got to know about this show, and I think you have to watch it. And I think it's a show that has a lot of depth to it, a lot of mythology to it, and I thought it had some pretty good writing, and it's interesting to see how everything comes full circle in it, and the romance I thought was so passionate and exciting, and there was a lot of sexual tension going on, and it just made me really, really happy and giddy inside. And so basically I just want to talk about that show, but kind of give like a little bit of a non-spoiler review of it and an introduction to it. Later, I'll go into some more spoiler details, but don't worry, I'll tell you when I arrive at that point. But right now, I really just want to introduce that show to you guys because it really captured my heart, and it's going to remind you quite a lot of Reylo, and actually not just Reylo, but it has a lot of similarities with another ship that was discussed in the Reylo community a lot, which is Zutara, which is from Avatar, The Last Airbender, the romance between Prince Zuko and Katara. So I do think that this show has a lot of similarities with both Reylo and Zutara. So without further ado, I'm gonna introduce that show to you guys, and that show is called Moon Lovers Scarlet Heart Ryeo. And this show came out in the year 2016. And it's actually a remake, not a remake, but an adaptation based on another show that came out in China called just Scarlet Heart. And it was actually based on a book first, and then the Chinese drama was made, and then after the Chinese drama was successful, the Korean drama was made for it. And I've seen a lot of the Chinese drama, but personally, I really liked the Korean drama more. And I'm not going to get into like all the details why that is, just because it's a big sensitive topic amongst the fandom of which drama did it better. Was it the original Scarlet Heart from China, or is it the new Korean drama? And anyway, it can be kind of heated, that discussion with fans, and so I'm gonna stay off of the reasons why I prefer the K-drama. But for this video, I'm gonna be just focusing on the Korean drama. And if you guys go and watch the Korean drama, then perhaps after you see it, you're more than welcome to go and watch the Chinese drama at some point, and then you can compare for yourself and decide for yourself which one you liked more. But personally, I absolutely loved the Korean adaptation for this show, and I can't really express in words just how much I love this show. And anyway, so that's basically where I'm at with this video, and so I'm going to be talking about the K-drama, so just know that this is going to be a discussion based on the K-drama, not the Chinese drama. And but also I want to point out that before I get into the details, that the book and the Chinese drama, basically the setup is that it's basically about a king, a real king who lived in history, that I guess slaughtered all of his brothers in order to acquire the throne. And I can't quite remember off the top of my head the name of the Chinese king that it's based off of, but then in the Korean drama, they picked their own historical figure, who was a king that they based their show off of. And so the real historical king in Moonlover Scarlet Heart Ryeo that the show has is King Gwangjong, and he is the fourth king of the Goryeo dynasty in Korea. And this took place, about over 1,000 years ago, I think 941. So anyway, long time ago. And basically the show is a combination between some real history that's based around a real historical figure, but then thrown in as a lot of like fiction and some fantasy. And they kind of, it's a really interesting way, the way that they spun this really interesting story that happens to involve a real historical king. And I can't really give away what all they say in the show is completely historically accurate or not. I went into this show actually not knowing what the true history was behind this king. So, and I actually think it was more fun that way, because I went into it blind, and I didn't actually, I wasn't able to guess right away. If you know the history, then you'll know some things going in of what's going to happen, what's fiction and what's fact. But anyway, so I would suggest, I think personally, if you're not familiar with King Gwangjong, then I wouldn't research it, just because I think the show has an extra layer of interest going into it if you do not know the history. But then I do think it's really good to, after you watch it, I'd recommend actually reading about King Gwangjong and kind of comparing and seeing what the show did that is historically accurate and what was more fictional. But anyway, so that's kind of like the idea based around it. But now I'm going to basically read off the synopsis so you guys can get an idea of the story and the setup and what to expect, without any spoilers, of course. During a total solar eclipse, a 25-year-old 21st century woman, Go Ha-jin, is transported back in time to the Goryeo dynasty of Korea during King Taejo's rule. She wakes up in the year of 941 in the body of Haesu, her past life, and finds herself in the house of 8th Prince Wang Wook, who is married to her cousin. She soon befriends several of the other princes and meets the fearsome and ostracized 4th Prince, Wang So. Although she knows she should not get involved in palace intrigues over the succession to the throne, she inadvertently becomes a pawn in the struggle as several of the princes fall in love with her. The question is, which among the princes becomes the infamous tyrant, And is there any way for her to change history? So now that I've read the synopsis, there's actually something that I do need to mention, just in case if you didn't quite understand. But when I said that she wakes up in the body of Hesu, her past life, this refers to the fact that in Asia, they actually believe that when you die, you are reincarnated and you have lived multiple past lives. So that is actually a common belief with their main religion there, which is Buddhism. So I just wanted to point that out, just in case if you're not familiar with Asian culture and religion, that's actually a fairly normal concept that they believe in, is that when you die, you are reincarnated. And when you are like walking around and alive, you can basically assume that you have lived multiple past lives already. So I guess you can say that Goha Jin, her modern day self, is her reincarnated form. But then after she goes through this total solar eclipse experience, she's kind of magically she's magically transported back in time, where she enters the body, her spirit enters the body of her past life self. So hopefully that makes sense. Anyway, so that's that. And I also wanted to mention that the music in this show, I think, is absolutely gorgeous. There is kind of like a balance between modern day music as well as some music that fits the time period of Goryeo. Some people are on the fence with it because they don't understand why there is some modern day music on the soundtrack, but to me it made total sense because Goha Jin, or Hesu, is from the 21st century, so it kind of makes sense that we would be hearing some music that's from the 21st century, since we are viewing the story from her point of view. But then and all that music is great and it's fun and very catchy, and I thought the music was fine. I really thought it still fit and it made sense to me. But the other music that's like more instrumental and in the background and their musical themes, I absolutely loved that music too. My absolute favorite track of this whole entire show is one that actually I had playing earlier in the background, but it's called Gesture of Resistance. And wow, that's probably one of my favorite, if not the favorite track that I've ever listened to in a Korean drama or any like TV show. It's just, every time that song comes on, I get goosebumps. Like I just, the feels. But anyway, so I just wanted to point that out, that I think that the music in this show is actually really well done as well. And it made me feel a lot of things, and I got really emotional at times. Anyway, and I also want to mention that, yes, even though this is a Korean drama and it's going to have, I guess, subtitles, I know a lot of people, for some reason, when they're introduced to like a foreign show, they're immediately worried about reading subtitles, and they're like, oh, if it has subtitles, it's not worth my time. I just don't want to read the subtitles. And I think that's kind of sad, because you're going to be missing out on a really great show if that is how you think. But I understand that probably what it is what they're worried about is taking turns between looking at the screen and then looking at the words. But thankfully with Asian dramas, I feel like that they have the sentences on the screen long enough that you can read it, and it's not like super, super long, like a paragraph, and then all of a sudden it goes away quickly and you weren't able to understand it. But I do think it gives enough time between looking and reading to the point where you're going to get used to it and it's not going to be a problem anymore. And in fact, you might even forget that you're even reading subtitles, because for me personally, I was so entranced and pulled in by the story that I sometimes forgot that, I was reading subtitles, and sometimes I would have to remind myself, now remember, Emily, you're reading subtitles, and I'm like, oh yeah. So I don't really think that that's going to be a problem for you guys going into it, unless you have something wrong like visually with your eyes, if you're having trouble like seeing. But if not, if you don't have a problem with that, then reading subtitles probably isn't going to be a problem for you, and you can enjoy it just fine. I am going to be playing the trailer for you guys, just so that you get more of a visual idea and you get to hear some of the music coming through and more of an idea of the story. So that, anyway, I guess it's just one more way that it could convince you to want to watch the series. I will say that the subtitles in the trailer are a little tiny, whoever made this. In the show, they're actually much bigger and much better quality. So just keep that in mind. But anyway, I really hope you guys enjoy the trailer. It always gets me hyped whenever I watch it because I just thought it was really, really well done. And anyway, so I'm going to play it now. So I hope you enjoy it.
넷째의 별이 송악 위에 떴다고 했던가. 고려 대운의 전조가 될 겁니다.
왕소 왕자를 조심해. 제가 그분의 인생을 바꿀 수 있다면요.
넌 이 흉측한 얼굴이 아무렇지도 않은 거냐?
제가 그 가면을 벗겨드리겠습니다.
남을 믿으면 죽고 가장 가까운 사람부터 의심해야 살 수 있는 것.
내가 할 수 있어. 모른 척하지 않을 거야. 누구도 불행해지게 놔두지 않아.
운명의 상대. 난 운명 따윈 믿지 않아. 보고 싶었다.
매 순간 그리웠다.
다 좀 내버려 두시라고요! 다른 세계, 다른 시간에서 만났으면 얼마나 좋았을까.
황제가 될 거다. 황제가 되겠다. 난 널 절대 놓치지 않는다.
Alright, so I hope you guys really liked the trailer. I sure get a thrill after I watch that trailer. Even now, I sometimes rewatch it, and it just, gets me so hyped for the show. Anyway, but I really hope that you guys choose to watch this show, especially if you're a Reylo fan, because after I watched this, I was just like, oh my goodness, this has major Reylo vibes. And I just loved the story, the passion. I really think the writing was really clever and nice. And anyway, it's just definitely one of my favorite shows of all time now. And I'm so happy I watched it, and it's always going to hold a special place in my heart. I don't know what my life would be like if I didn't watch it. But anyway, but after giving all these positive, happy vibes or feelings, I guess, off about how much I really liked this show, I do want to give one non-spoiler warning. So don't worry, I'm not going to give any details yet, but there is one major thing that you need to keep in mind before going into this show, and I think that it's best if you know this before going into it, and that is this show has a lot of tragedy and heavy emotion in it. So if you are really sensitive to stuff like that, then you may not enjoy it as much as I did and a lot of other fans did. However, a lot of us, even if we say we don't like sad things, we still admit that this was a really, really good show and we don't regret it. However, so I guess even though it was really good, there were some really sad, tragic moments, and that includes at the end. Now, I told you I'm not going to give away spoilers here, but I do want to point out that yes, even though there are some sad things that happen at the end that make it really heavy and emotional, something that you might have not known is that this show actually was originally going to have a season 2. And so I guess knowing that will help you with what I'm about to say next, which is when the series ends, there is something heavily implied that I think makes all those events at the very end a little easier to, I guess, accept or understand. So you won't fully understand what I'm trying to say here until, of course, if you've seen it or have seen it, and you can discuss what I'm talking about here and where the show ends. But just know that this show was going to get a season 2, and it does heavily imply something at the end that makes it a little less painful, and it gives you some hope. I'll just put it that way. It does give off some hope for the future. And I did mention earlier that this show originally, well, actually not this one, but there was a Chinese drama. And in the Chinese drama, when it got really popular and they made that series, after it had its run, then a few years later, they actually ended up making a season 2 for the Chinese drama. And from what I've heard, the Chinese drama season 2 ends a lot happier. So I think that, yes, this show can stand on its own without a season 2, but they were going to go and make a season 2 for this series, just like they did for the Chinese one. And for whatever reason, I guess the ratings weren't really high for the Korean drama when this first aired. It's different now. This show actually has gained a lot of popularity, and especially with the international audience. But anyway, I think there was like another show at the time that was airing that kind of stole its thunder, and there was like a popular star in that show. But for everyone that have seen that other show and then this one, they all agree that Moon Lover's Scarlet Heart Ryeo was the better show. So hopefully with all of that gained popularity, a lot of people say sometimes that it's unlikely that a season 2 will happen, but I'd like to think otherwise, that since this show is picking up a lot of popularity and attention now, that perhaps there is a chance that this show could possibly get a season 2. But in order for that to happen, we need a lot of vocal fans, I guess, to go out of their way and try to make this series known, and the people who are in charge of the series to let them know, hey, we love this show and we really want a season 2. There's a big market for it, and hopefully if we fight for it enough, they'll realize it's worth it to make the season 2. So I'm hopefully, if you guys become a part of this fandom, I really hope you do become a part of this awesome show and its fandom, because this show needs your help. I'm begging you for your help pretty much now, for you to jump on board in this fandom and help give a voice to trying to get this show a season 2. So anyway, I hope with everything that I've said, I hope with this warning, even though I didn't want to spoil anything, so I hope this non-spoiler warning was able to, yes, give a warning, but also keep you guessing at the same time. But just remember that the show does have a little bit of hope that it hints at the end, so it's not like it's going to be like it ends and it's like, oh man, this is just horrible, there's no hope, the world is coming to an end sort of thing. Kind of like what happened with Tross, or The Rise of Skywalker anyway. I just left that theater being like, wow, there's no hope now. But it doesn't end quite that way with this show. At first, it's going to be sad, but at the same time, when it does give that hint, you're like, oh, okay, like, wow, that's really interesting. That's really cool. And, again, I think the hardest thing is I just think that this show needed a season 2, and it does need a season 2. It should have a season 2. So anyway, I really hope that you guys really start watching this show and fall in love with it as much as I did. And then I hope that the show keeps you on your toes and keeps you guessing and gets you excited and it fills you with passion. And anyway, it's a very it's a big emotional roller coaster. So it definitely takes you for a ride. But it's a ride that I will never regret, and it's definitely one of my all-time favorite series ever. It was fantastic. It was phenomenal, and I do think, in a way, that I would call it a masterpiece. It is a masterpiece. So, anyway, I think I have ranted far enough about everything that I want to talk about before I get into the spoiler section. So, I will be linking the trailer that you saw earlier if you want to see that all by itself later without rewatching this video. I'll do that for you guys, but I'll also be linking where you can watch the show online. Unfortunately, it's not available on anything like Netflix or Hulu or HBO or any of those streaming apps. Unfortunately, like I said before, like with those lower ratings that it first came out with, I guess they didn't end up putting it at least not for a long time on anywhere specific for very long. So unfortunately, the only place that you can now find it is on this website that I'm about to give you guys. I will give a warning in terms of the fact that this website sometimes has like some ads and some pop-ups that you need to be aware of. I haven't had any like virus issues at all with it, but it's just sort of annoying. So as long as you don't like click on anything, that you should be safe. I actually did end up downloading this entire show so that way I didn't have to like deal with all of the ads. But anyway, if I can find a DVD of it someday, I really want to buy it and own it for myself, because this show is definitely something that I want to add to my collection, and it's probably something you guys should add to your collection, because you might be obsessed with it after you watch it, like me. And it completely rules your life now, or at least it definitely rules my life now. So anyway, so now that I have said pretty much everything I wanted to talk about in the non-spoiler section, I am now going to be talking about the spoiler section and how everything relates to, of course, Reylo on a more detailed level. So anyway, if you do not want to be spoiled on anything specific or details, like, I want to tell you right now that this is the point you need to leave. I love you all, but yeah, if you don't want to be spoiled, then just leave. But then after you have watched the series, and I strongly encourage you to come back and continue watching this if you are interested, and I hope you will be interested. So anyway, once again, spoiler alert. If you don't want to be spoiled, do not go on, don't go beyond this point. So anyway, I hope you guys join me in the next part after you watch this series. Thanks. All right, so I hope that anyone who didn't want to be spoiled left, because this is officially my spoiler section. So this should be a really fun talk. I had a really hard time trying to come up with everything that I wanted to discuss in this, because I know that there's just countless similarities with this show and Reylo, so I really had to kind of just go over the highlights, the things that stood out to me the most. Otherwise, I'd be here for hours talking about it. So anyway, so first things first, we're going to talk about, of course, the couple that resembles Reylo in this show. And that, of course, is Wong So and Haesoo. And, of course, their ship name, when you put those two names together, it becomes Sosu. So, yeah. So that's their ship name, Sosu. Kind of cute. But they have a lot of similarities with Reylo, not just visually, but in their personalities and backstories as well. And of course, as the story unfolds, there's some further details that make them pretty similar to Reylo. So we're going to first talk about Wong So here, our lovely, handsome, charming, and very complex leading man. And right away, when I saw Wong So on the poster, I immediately connected the dots that he was extremely similar to Kylo Ren. In fact, this image that I have next to him on the right of Kylo Ren, and this image I have of Wong So on the left, it's almost the exact same type of picture here. And so he definitely gave off that Kylo Ren sort of vibe when I first saw him. But we're going to talk about like his backstory and what makes Wong So kind of similar to Kylo Ren. And first things first, if we're going to talk about his family, because that's a big thing. But of course, when we were introduced to Kylo Ren in The Force Awakens, there was a lot of things going on with his parents, and something mysterious as to what made him turn, like with him being turned away by the manipulation of Snoke. But we kind of get this idea that Leia and Han neglected Ben and sent him away. And then, of course, he spent some time with Luke in his Jedi training school, where something obviously went wrong. And we come to find out that Luke actually thought about killing him. And this really scarred Ben Solo and turned him into Kylo Ren, because now he no longer trusted his family. And so he basically abandoned that side of him and became Kylo Ren, which of course resulted in him killing Han Solo later. And we're not going to get into obviously all the details of that, because it's been talked to death, but no pun intended. But the thing about been here is that although his parents, Han and Leia, neglected him and made some mistakes as parents, at the end of the day, you could still tell that both Han and Leia did deeply care about their son. Whether or not he got it, he understood that as the films went on. Of course, though, we do get an idea at the very end of The Rise of Skywalker. As much as I don't like that movie, at least we get to see that he kind of makes peace with his family, with Han and I think his mom. But so that was at least nice, that he at least knew that his parents still cared for him and loved him, even if he misunderstood and didn't understand at the time. We still understand that he was loved by his family, by his parents. Unfortunately for Wong So, that wasn't necessarily the case. In fact, I would say that Wong So's backstory is actually more similar to Prince Zuko, which I mentioned earlier at the beginning of this video. But if we're going to talk about Wong So's backstory and show the similarities that he has, he does have some issues with his family in terms of like neglect and trying to find belonging, of course. But with Wong So's parents, you can kind of tell they didn't really care for him that much at all, even. It's more complicated with his dad, but with his mother, you get a more ultimatum on how she felt. Because we start out with a backstory with Wong So, where we find out that his mother was angry that his father, who was the king, was going to get married to somebody else on the same night that her oldest son, who was the crown prince, died. And she was so upset and angry at the king that she basically threatened that she would kill one of her other sons if he still went through with that marriage, which is crazy. So she basically held a knife to Wong So, and as she's threatening to kill him, thankfully his father, who is the king, steps in and stops her from killing Wong So, her own son. But unfortunately, she still managed to cut his face, and it left a permanent scar forever on him. And it not only was a physical scar, but it ended up being an even much deeper emotional scar on Wong So. And back then, that was a really big deal, especially for royalty, to have scars on their face. And you were kind of treated like a monster or an outcast if you were, I guess, flawed like that. And as a result of this, Wong So ends up being taken away to a different clan or kingdom, I guess you could say, where his father sets him up with, I guess, one of his former concubines who had lost her son. And so he sends Wong So to be, I guess, the replacement son of that other concubine that he once had. So he becomes, I guess, an adopted member of this other clan. But unfortunately, we find out that this clan actually was very abusive too, which further made more deep, painful scars on Wong So. And it's just so sad that his abuse continually. And we find out all the things that happened where I guess this woman was crazy and she at times thought he was her real son, but then when she snapped out of it, she would, I guess, beat him or she'd lock him away. And I guess the clan also did some pretty cruel things to him too by leaving him alone in the woods where wolves were coming to, I guess, eat him, and he had to basically fight for himself and defend himself, and because of this, when all these wolves were attacking him and he had to fight to survive, it resulted in him having even more scars on his body. So it's just really devastating to find out everything that this poor guy went through as a child, and then of course growing up, it just continued throughout all his life. He never really had anyone that he felt loved him, and it's so sad, and it continued because of course his main goal when he comes back to the kingdom after all these years for that ritual, he is determined to stay and to gain the acceptance of his family, and most particularly in his mother. And you see everything that he does throughout the series, where he's trying to find ways to gain his mother's acceptance and love. And unfortunately, she never gives it to him. Even when she lies on her deathbed, she didn't even give it to him then. And some people claim that she did at the last second when she puts her hand on his face. But to me, it looked more like an angry claw than something like a mother's soft hand. So, yeah, it's just devastating to find out that even to the day that she died, she never gave any love or acceptance or even deathbed repentance to her son, which is just so horrible and sad. And that's why I mainly think that he has a lot of similarities with Prince Zuko, because we of course find out that when he was young, he had an abusive father who basically, because he talked out of turn at some meeting, he decided to challenge him to a fight and permanently burned Zuko's face as a result of this. And he was only 13 at the time, definitely not deserving of something like that. And of course, this burn mark that he gets on his face is a permanent scar for life, and of course an even deeper scar emotionally on him. And after this, Zuko's main drive throughout the whole story is he wants to gain the acceptance of his father. And, you know, to a point where he's just obsessed. He's like, I have to regain my honor. And thankfully, we know how the story goes, where Zuko realizes that in the end, his father's acceptance wasn't what he needed, and he realized it was misplaced and wrong, and his father was just evil and not a loving person, and, you know, that's not where he was going to get his belonging in the end. And thankfully, he was able to turn his destiny around, and he became one of the heroes, so good for Zuko. So I do think that both Prince Zuko and Wong So have a very similar drive and backstory, as well as emotional and physical scar that basically drives them throughout their story. So of course, Wong So, Prince Zuko, and of course Kylo Ren, they're all basically Dark Prince characters who have a very complicated past, dark past, I guess, and they're very misunderstood, and they're very much tormented souls that are in need of love. And of course, I have a deep love for those kind of characters. It really gets to me in the feel. So whenever there's a character that is presented in a show like that, of course, I'm going to immediately attach to that character, and I'm going to want to see what happens to them throughout the show. And of course, I hope that they get that happy ending and that love that they seek so desperately. So next we're going to talk about, of course, Haesue and her similarities with Rey. Now, there is one major difference between Haesue and Rey, and for those who really like that strong, warrior type of woman, Haesue is not necessarily, she's just not. She's not a warrior. She can't fight. She's not like that at all. But I do think that Haesue is actually a very strong female character, and I'll explain why here in a second. But and I have nothing against strong women or anything like that. In fact, as a woman myself, I want to see those strong female characters on screen. I just don't think that the only form of strength that a woman can have in film or in a TV show is if they have superpowers or if they can kick butt and beat people up. I don't think that that's necessarily the only way a woman should be depicted as strong in a show. And I feel like that happens almost too often now. So I'm just going to get into like the definitions of what makes, I think, Haesue a very strong character in this show. And the first thing that I love about her is that she is extremely compassionate. And of course, Rey, I think, at least in the first two movies anyway, Rey is definitely a character that was set up to be this very kind, compassionate, patient soul. And that's very much just like Haesue, where she's very compassionate and she gives love to basically everyone that she encounters and does her best to be understanding and patient even with people who, like Wang So, at the very beginning seem to be very monstrous and scary and intimidating, she still takes the time to be patient and understand him and hear him out and kind of relate to him. And she does find a way to relate to him, which I'll talk about later. But she's also a very selfless character. You constantly see Haesoo doing everything for everyone else. She thinks about people first before she thinks about herself. There are plenty of times where Haesoo is in trouble, and this is where I think it's kind of annoying, where some people are like, oh my gosh, I don't like Haesoo because she's constantly needed to be saved, and she's kind of a damsel in distress, and blah, blah, blah. And I get it. Yeah, she gets saved a lot, but it's in situations where I really understand why. I mean, if anyone could be in that situation and be in trouble. It's not like she goes out and looks for trouble and gets herself into trouble, and as a result someone has to come save her. But, you know, it's all these realistic situations that she's in that she does, I guess, need someone to come and save her. But the thing is that Haesoo never, like, complains. There's even a scene where she's badly wounded because she was, like, tortured for being framed. I think she was framed for poisoning the prince, or Yeonhwa, the princess, and she ends up getting tortured as a result of it. And of course it wasn't her that poisoned them, but of course, because of this misunderstanding, she gets thrown in this jail and she gets tortured and she's bleeding out. And Wang So, when he finds out about this, comes to see her. And in her horrible and miserable, painful condition, instead of talking about how much pain she was in, she ended up telling him that she's glad that he's alive, even though because he was poisoned too. And she's just grateful that he's alive and that he should listen to his doctor and not get up and walk around too much. And I just... and I think he's really surprised in that situation too, that she only thinks about somebody else and not even herself. So I really think that that's an admirable trait of Haesoo, and she's also a very forgiving person. There are so many people throughout this show that make mistakes that end up hurting Haesoo, but I feel like at the end of the day she is such a forgiving, merciful soul, and I think in many ways it's hard for us on a daily basis when we get wrong to extend forgiveness and mercy to people. And it may seem a little too far that she will go to give people forgiveness or mercy, but I feel like that's, again, I think she's being a really great role model as a character to be able to have that strength to give that mercy and forgiveness to someone else who wronged her. Yeah, so she's just such a adorable character, and she's also like very hardworking. She will do her best in any situation that she's in to figure it out, to get through it. She's constantly saying, don't worry, I will be fine, I will get through it, I'm a quick learner. So she's also a very optimistic. She's a very optimistic person, and she always tries to see the good in people or in the situation that she's in. Even if it's a bad situation, she tries to see the good in it. And she has a very lively type of personality, where a lot of people back in that century do not have that type of personality. But of course, since she's from the 21st century, she has a very bright, happy kind of personality about her, which is just super cute and sweet. And it's fun to see how the princes and of course Wang So react to her different personality as opposed to other women at that time. So all in all, I think that these traits make Haesoo an extremely strong female character, and I loved her and I rooted for her. She's just so endearing and adorable, and I loved her. I loved Haesoo as the female lead in this show. Now we're going to talk about her backstory that I think is somewhat similar to Rey, but in a different way. Instead of her parents, because surprisingly we don't get a lot of information on Haesoo's backstory with her family, but what we do find out is that in the 21st century, before she ever came back in time to the Goryeo dynasty, we find out that she had a boyfriend, and her best friend, who she did her makeup for that very same day, because she's a makeup consultant, she basically goes out with her boyfriend and betrays her best friend. And this, of course, breaks Jesus' heart, or Go Ha-jin's heart, to find out that her best friend had betrayed her. And not only her best friend, but of course her boyfriend. So they both betrayed her. And not only that, but then they took everything that she saved, and they also ended up taking her house. And we don't get much more detail on that, but clearly there was some complicated things that occurred where not only was her heart broken, but then she was left without a home as well. And so she felt like she had nowhere to go. And I think in many ways she deals with abandonment issues, just like how Rey had abandonment issues of her parents leaving her on Jakku like that. She had to learn how to fend for herself. So very much I think that both her and Wang So had abandonment issues, and they were looking for belonging, and thankfully over the course of the show they find it in each other, of course, because they relate to each other's pain and can see each other for who they really are. So now we're going to talk about, I guess, Katara very briefly, of course, because there's not a whole lot, again, similar between her and Katara in terms of their physical abilities, because of course Katara is a bit of a warrior bender with her amazing waterbending skill, and of course Jesus is not a warrior in any way, but I do think that Jesus does constantly give people wisdom and advice on situations that they're put in, and I think very much Katara is the same way, where she is constantly throughout the series, she's like that motherly, sensitive type that always wants to support people, give them advice, make them feel good about themselves. And she's just this really kind, compassionate soul. And I think the same way about Jesus. She's just this kind, compassionate soul, and both of them share that quality, which is awesome. And I still wish to this day that the end of Avatar: The Last Airbender had Katara and Zuko getting together. But, oh well. I wasn't the writer, but I'm still upset about it. They would have been so perfect for each other. So the next Reylo similarity that I really want to touch on is the concept of destined lovers. And I think it's pretty clear in The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi that there's a ton of evidence that supports that Kylo Ren and Rey, or Ben Solo and Rey, are destined to be together. And there was also a lot of other evidence to suggest this, with, of course, Rian Johnson tweeting the spools of red thread. And, of course, in the script, I think it even said that Kylo Ren sensed that their destinies were intertwined, but how? And there's even more than that, but it was just obvious to all of us Reylos in our community that clearly Kylo Ren and Rey were destined lovers. And the same is definitely true in Moon Lovers, Scarlet Heart Ryeo, between Wang So and Jesus. And, of course, the Red String of Fate was the main thing that a lot of people went to because of Rian Johnson tweeting the spools of red thread, because it led to that legend. But anyway, according to this legend, it's an ancient Chinese legend about a magical connection between two people that are destined to be soulmates, called the Red String of Fate. The two people connected by the red thread are destined lovers regardless of time, place, or circumstance. The magical cord may stretch or tangle but never break. This myth is similar to the Western concept of soulmates. So, based on reading that, I mean, it does sound similar to Kylo Ren and Rey's story, but it also is extremely similar to the setup between Wang So and Jesus, considering that these gods of fate literally brought her back in time to meet her destined lover, which of course is Wang So. So it kind of goes along with that, regardless of time, place, or circumstance. And I like how it says that the cord may stretch or tangle but never break, because there are so many trials and hardships that poor Wang So and Jesus go through in their relationship and their struggle to try to be together. But thankfully we know that no matter how hard times are going to get, their cord is never going to break. there is so much symbolism in Star Wars with all of the moons and suns and planets and everything, like whether it's in the opening shot of the film or later down the road, there's just so much of that symbolism scattered throughout the story. And it's the same way in Moon Lovers, because of course, well, for one thing, it's called Moon Lovers, and of course at the very beginning of the story we get a solar eclipse happening, and of course that solar eclipse brings her back in time to meet Wong So, and you see that same solar eclipse again near the end when she's going back to her own time. It appears, but I just love how when the solar eclipse first appears, I love how she's in the water, and as she's slowly disappearing into the eclipse, we get Wong So, who rides into the eclipse on his horse. Basically, visually, we get a great cinematic representation of the fact that both Wong So and Haesu are these two destined lovers that the sun and the moon have brought together. And it was just such a beautiful shot, and I just love how seamless and well done it looks in the show. But along with that idea of the eclipse bringing them together magically, I feel like Haesu and Wong So symbolically are taking the place of the sun and the moon. So Haesu is the moon and Wong So is the sun. And I love how in mythology, and I think even in Greek mythology, there is this really interesting legend about the sun and the moon being in love. And I think this is one of my favorite quotes that I've read about this idea, where it says, "Sometimes I think of the sun and the moon as lovers who rarely meet, always chase, and almost always miss one another. But once in a while, they do catch up, and they kiss, and the whole world stares in awe of their eclipse." So, in other words, the sun and the moon are constantly chasing each other because they're in love and they want to meet up, and eventually they do. And I think that is definitely symbolic in that scene, is that she is the moon that comes and chases the sun, and that's when they're able to be together, is when they cross over and form an eclipse. And I also just love the fact that throughout the show they make it pretty clear who her love interest is symbolically, because I think a lot of fans, when they watch it, even to this day, whether or not you agree who she ended up with, obviously I think most of us agree that Wong So is the best choice and made the most sense. But there's still some fans that kind of wish that she ended up with some of the other princes, which I don't really understand. But anyway, it's okay, we all have different tastes. But I like how in the show they make it pretty clear in the symbolism who she's connected with. And there's so many scenes throughout the show where they're looking up at the stars, but oddly enough, Haesu and Wong So are the only two characters who actually are looking up at the moon. And of course, that connects them, considering that the title of the series is Moon Lovers, because they are the lovers in the story. And I also think there's a lot of evidence, too, that Wong So is her lover further than that, because if you remember in the beginning, he's kind of the scary, intimidating guy that everyone calls a wolf dog. And we all know that wolves, of course, are usually associated with the moon, and they howl at the moon. So, of course, we could say he's howling for, I guess, his lover, his mate, which is Haesu, which I find really, really cool. And it even furthers this, too, when his brother, even though he's one of the villains, when his brother is, I guess he had just killed the crown prince, and he's about to kill Haesu, unless, of course, Wong So does what he wants. And he says something really telling about at least how everything's going to end later. But he says, "A wolf tends to devote himself to one female to the grave." So I thought that was kind of interesting, and he also furthers it by saying, "And you too are a beast," because that is ultimately what happens in the end of the show, because Haesu does end up dying, of course. Wong So ends up only giving his heart to one woman for the rest of his life till he died, and of course that woman was Haesu. Yes, he was married to Princess, or I guess Queen Yeonhwa, but he never really loved her at all. And in fact, he makes it pretty clear at the end that he wants nothing to do with her or the child they had together, because really the only woman he wants to remember is Heisu, because of how kind and compassionate she was and that she really cared for him, and she wasn't greedy like the other queen was. So I think it's really telling that it really is true that he really devoted himself only to one female until the day he died, because his heart would always belong to Heisu, which is really sweet but also really sad. So hopefully one day they'll meet again when they're reincarnated over, right? So the other thing that I want to talk about that's also similar to Reylo, because of course there's another thing that has inspired Reylo as well. In fact, a lot of the mythology that has inspired Reylo comes from Asia. Yes, there has been some Greek mythology and some Christian mythology, but ultimately there's been a ton of Asian mythology. And of course I just got through telling about the Red String of Fate, but the next Asian piece of mythology that I think Reylo included in Star Wars, or also in Moon Lovers, is of course the yin and the yang. And of course the yin and the yang represent balance and like opposite forces in the universe, but ultimately need each other. And of course we have that represented with Kylo Ren and Rey being the light, Kylo being the dark, but they both have a little bit of a piece of the other in them, and they constantly are trying to chase one another until they're together again and whole again, until that they find their other half. And ultimately I think that that's a very similar concept as well in Moon Lovers, especially, I mean, most obviously you can tell that the yin yang symbol kind of appears on the poster of the show, because I mean the way they're centered in the middle, and they're kind of in a circle. He's in black and she's in white, and it kind of has that balance factor kind of going on in it. So I do think that there is a lot of that yin and yang symbolism between Wong So and Heisu as well. And even throughout the whole entire show, it's not just represented here in the poster, but in the whole show you'll notice that Wong So is almost always wearing black, and Heisu is almost always wearing white or something that's like light and pastel colored. There are some times where he will wear red and she'll wear some other colors too, but predominantly the two colors that they're always wearing is Wong So is in black and Heisu is in white. And I think that was a really great theme that they continued throughout the series, to show that he's in black, she's in white, and together they form balance. And I thought that also it was really interesting in Avatar: The Last Airbender, because they also included a similar type of balance factor in it, especially with, of course, the imagery between Katara and Zuko. I love the episode when they're in the North Pole and they're fighting the Fire Nation when they're invading, and Zuko comes to take Aang, and when Katara and Zuko meet and they're facing off and they're fighting, Zuko says something really cool that will always stick with me to Katara, when he says, "You rise with the moon, I rise with the sun." So again, it comes back to that moon and sun imagery and mythology, where they kind of just go together and they follow one another. And I think even then there was those two fish in the pond that represent yin and yang. One is white with some black, one is black with some white. And this is all happening while Zuko and Katara are having this fight, and he had just said this sentence of, "You rise with the moon, I rise with the sun." And I love it. And I really think that Zuko and Katara were meant for each other. Just saying. But again, I just think that's another great similarity that Moon Lovers has with both Reylo and Zutara, is the fact that they are this balance and this yin and yang, that the universe somehow wants them to come together and find that understanding and balance with one another and work together, which is all the more reason to believe that clearly one day they are going to meet again and work it out, and everything's going to be fine and lovely and fuzzy and happy, right? All right. Well, anyway, you get my point. So moving on to the next Asian belief that they have in Star Wars, which was actually discussed quite a bit by a couple of different YouTubers. It was discussed by What the Force and another guy by the name of Wayward Jedi, and this concept was the idea that Kylo Ren and Rey are the reincarnated forms of Padme and Anakin. This theory got a lot of interesting responses from the fandom, me included. I thought it was a really, really brilliant idea or theory that this possibly could have happened, and I still think that it could have very well been what they were going to do in Tross, but unfortunately they kind of went in a different direction, which we're not going to really get into. But the thing that I think everyone notices before I get too deep into this theory is that Kylo Ren and Rey have a ton of similarities between Padme and Anakin. And you can see it. You can see in the scenes that sometimes it's like repeating history, whether it be Padme going to Mustafar and Rey going to Snoke's his ship in The Last Jedi when she goes to help Ben, and of course that's where he kills Snoke, but then he's not quite ready to take the step and he wants her to rule the galaxy with him and whatnot. It's like almost the exact same thing. And so anyway, I'm just saying there are a lot of parallels that link Kylo Ren and Rey to the past with Padme and Anakin. There's just lots of evidence for it. Whether we want to get too literal, I think everyone can at least agree as a minimum that there is a ton of thematic evidence and symbolism that shows how similar these two couples were. And of course, the theory that people nicknamed this is Reverse Amidala, where basically, of course, everything went wrong in the prequels, where everything fell apart, and Anakin went from a really good person who was selfless to being a very possessive and selfish kind of person, which of course made him want the power more than, of course, his love, which of course drove the galaxy to tragedy and his life and his love to tragedy. But then ultimately, after that fell out of balance, I think that the sequel trilogy, or at least the idea behind it, was that Rey and Kylo Ren were going to be that correction. Where Padme and Anakin messed up, Rey and Kylo Ren were going to be the correction that the galaxy needed, where they would find that understanding and that balance and that selfless love once again, where yin and yang again come together. So I just thought that was a really beautiful idea about the whole Reverse Amidala theory. And Wayward Jedi, and of course, I think even What the Force that I mentioned earlier went over this theory in a lot more detail and depth, which at some point I really strongly recommend you guys check out if you haven't already. I know that the movies are all out and we already know kind of what they ended up deciding to do, but I think there's a lot of evidence to show that this very well could have been the idea that they were leaning towards in the story before everything got changed. So anyway, I really strongly recommend watching that. But the main thing that I really wanted to talk about too with that is Wayward Jedi also posted a video that really got my attention back then called Rey as Bodhisattva. And I did some research on the Bodhisattva even more so afterwards, and I think that there is a lot of truth that, or at least similarities that connect moon lovers to this idea as well, because of course the Bodhisattva comes from Asia, and of course this is a Korean drama, so it's no surprise that there would be something like this in the show. And I have to say that it's kind of funny when I did hear about this theory in Star Wars, because so many people, or at least not so many, but there were quite a bit of people that kind of said, oh, that would be so stupid, that's just horrible writing, that's poor writing, if they're just the reincarnation of them, that's just so weird and lazy, and I didn't agree with that. I thought that was kind of a strange opinion to have. Of course, it's their opinion, that's fine. We all have different ideas of where the story was ultimately going, but I thought that was a kind of a ridiculous statement to say that it was lazy writing, because ultimately Star Wars has, of course, again, so much Asian mythology influence in its story already that this again was going to make even further sense to me. But also, like, there's so many other shows that I grew up with that have this idea in it, so I don't understand what they're meaning on oh, that would be a terrible idea, because there's so many shows that capitalize on this. I know that Avatar: The Last Airbender was definitely inspired by this idea of a bodhisattva, because of course Aang is a reincarnated being. He's lived so many past lives until he can get to that point of enlightenment. That's who the avatar is, to take that balance and or to bring the world back into balance. That's the main goal that the avatar tries to achieve every single time he's reincarnated. And even in some other shows that I've watched that are from Asia, this idea is all throughout Asian entertainment, where they have a story or premise that has some kind of idea of reincarnation embedded in it. And so I don't know. So to me, this was like a very normal thing to come across in a story, to have that reincarnation and this rebirth and fixing the problems of their past. So to me, I thought reincarnation would have been a really interesting direction that the story could have taken in Star Wars. But I do think that it definitely is at play in Moon Lovers, which I'll go into in just a second here. But I do want to give some background on who the Bodhisattva is. And just as a reminder, George Lucas actually read a book by Joseph Campbell called The Hero with a Thousand Faces. And in his book, he talks about a woman in Buddhism called the Bodhisattva. She's like this mother goddess type figure. And he explains that basically, if you want a good definition of who the Bodhisattva is, she's a person who is able to reach nirvana, but delays doing so out of compassion in order to save suffering beings. And nirvana is basically like, after you've lived so many past lives, you eventually achieve nirvana, which is like the most compassion, wisdom, and enlightenment you can possibly get. And so at that point, it basically, nirvana is paradise, and you no longer have to be reincarnated over and over again because you've learned and gained everything you need. So basically, and then of course, if we want the literal translation of bodhisattva, bodhisattva translates to one whose essence is enlightenment. And I think that that's really interesting, considering that throughout the whole show of Moon Lovers, I think Heisu basically is this figure. She is the bodhisattva figure, because she longs to basically give advice or wisdom and enlightenment to others. And she's constantly giving out compassion, and she's so patient and kind. And of course, she's always trying to awaken others to enlightenment as well. And she's trying to save people who suffer. And of course, the one in the show that suffers the most is Wang So. So you can say that she is the bodhisattva who has come back in time to give that compassion and enlightenment to Wang So, who is suffering, and in turn awaken him. And that's effectively what happens at the very end, because he does kind of like, after she dies, has this kind of awakening or realization, and he does become this really wise, good king in the end. So in a way, she did her job as a bodhisattva should. I guess at that point, all we need to wait for is for him to one day be reincarnated, so that they can once again find each other and be together forever, right? But the other cool thing about the bodhisattva is that she has an interesting mantra linked to her called Om Mani Padme Hum. And of course, this translates to the jewel is in the lotus. And basically, Padme, from Star Wars, of course, Padme's name translates to lotus. And if you look at Mani, if you just take off the M, it becomes Annie. And of course, that is the nickname that Padme always called Anakin. She always called him Annie. So of course, we could say that Anakin was the jewel and Padme was the lotus, because of course, Anakin, being the special chosen one that he was the jewel, and Padme, who brought forth new life, was of course the lotus. And the same is true, I think, with Wang So and of course Heisu, because Wang So, who was a king, in fact his name Guangzheng translates to shining emperor. So of course he is the jewel, and Heisu, of course, is the lotus. And the reason why I say that she is the lotus is because if you remember back to when Wang So gave her her hair ornament, the hairpiece he gives her looks like it has a lotus flower, a white lotus flower on it, actually. And I've heard a lot of people say that it's a peony, and maybe it is, but to me it looks a lot like a white lotus. Like if you even compare images of lotus flowers to it, you can tell that the shape is pretty much the same, with the shape of the tips of the petals being really pointy, and the placement of the petals as well. So to me, I would say that it's definitely a white lotus flower on her hair ornament. And the same is true with even like when the show first starts and you see the intro, it's that same butterfly and the lotus coming in, which is really, really cool. I like how they kind of snuck that symbolism in. And then at the very end, when she dies and her ashes are inside that jar, you'll notice that there's an etching on the jar of again, a butterfly and what looks to be that same flower, which was the lotus. It's kind of hard to make out the flower on this because it's just so faint, but I tried to draw on it as best as I could, but it looks as if it has the same pointed petals on it like the lotus does. And of course, the reason why the lotus flower is linked to the Bodhisattva or to Padme, or of course, in this case, Heisu, is there's a lot of interesting symbolism that is similar to what the Bodhisattva stands for, and it's just very similar, so of course it makes sense why it's connected and why it's important and why it's a symbol that's used in the show. And basically, the white lotus is a symbol of purity, enlightenment, and rebirth. And which means a lot, considering that there is that reincarnation sort of theme going throughout the series, that even though she died, she is reincarnated again as Goha Jin, and it's implied, of course, that Wang So is going to find her. But along with that, it's constantly talking about enlightenment and how Buddhists believe that it's necessary to be reborn thousands of times, polishing one's being through many incarnations until one reaches nirvana, the highest state of consciousness that humans can access. So again, it comes back to that nirvana and enlightenment. And it also represents the fact that a lotus will overcome pain and will always prevail in a material world and become enlightened. And the lotus flower also starts to grow in a dirty and muddy water, but manages to surpass the water and produce a perfect flower. And I think that also is important with the fact that when she goes back in time, how does she do it? Well, she's in the water. How she goes into the water, and it seems like she's going to drown, and it's this dark kind of scary thing, but then she emerges, and of course, Heisu becomes that kind, reborn, pure flower throughout the story. And of course, she's reborn again at the very end of the show as well in the modern world. But anyway, so I just thought that was a really cool thing, and they even have some lotus flowers throughout the show that they kind of hint at, which I thought was cool when they're building like the lanterns at her at Prince Wang Wook's house. They're building these lotus lanterns. So I just thought that was just really, really fascinating, the way that they linked the lotus flower. And I guess you'd only know that if you are aware of a lot of Asian mythology and culture. But anyway, if you didn't know that before, that's just kind of an interesting new tidbit to know about. And I think that flower is so important, especially with the fact that Wang So picked it as a gift for Heisu, because I think it really represents the fact that their love is forever, and that Heisu will live again, and their love is going to live again, and they're going to find each other again in the modern world. And I really hope that season 2 happens, you guys, so we can see that. I mean, I know they hint at it, but come on, we need more than that. We need to actually see it and live it and just drink it in. But anyway, we'll see. We'll fight for it, right? So the last similarity with Reylo that I really wanted to touch on here is, I remember back when we were discussing what would happen with Kylo Ren's scar, and everyone basically in the Reylo community was talking about how awesome it would be to have a scene where Rey touches the scar on his face, and how moving and intimate that would be, and very tender. And as well as I think that would have so much meaning behind it, considering that both Rey and Kylo Ren are very scarred individuals, and I think that having her touch his scar would show that it goes beyond just the physical, but also the emotional scars that lie deep within both of them. And unfortunately, we didn't quite get that scene. We did kind of get something in The Last Jedi when they're touching hands across the fire, but I do know that we really wanted to see that, where Rey did eventually touch his scar. So even though that didn't happen, we did get something similar like that in Avatar: The Last Airbender, even though that ship actually, sadly, didn't sail in the end, which it should have. But there's a really nice scene in Avatar where Katara is thinking about healing the scar on Zuko's face, and she goes up to touch his face, and I just always have read that as kind of something romantic when a woman touches a man's face like that. And something similar that happens also in Moon Lovers that's very similar is the fact that Heisu ends up touching the scar on Wong So's face. She's about to do, if you guys remember, she's about to do his makeup to try to cover up the scar so he could feel more confident in himself. But this scene when she's touching his scar, really, just the way they shot it, it really was just so intimate and intense, and really quite a beautiful and touching scene. So I'm really glad that we at least got that scene in Moon Lovers, to have this moment where she's touching his face. And again, I think it goes beyond just the physical scar, because I think in this moment, this is one of the main moments where he opens up his heart completely to Heisu, because he asks her if he can trust her, and this is where she tells him that she was betrayed a lot because she trusted people too much. And this really opens his eyes, because he realizes that Heisu feels very much the same as him, considering that he's been betrayed by the people he loves too, and the fact that she's told him this makes him trust her that much more, because they are alike and they felt similar things and similar pain. And even earlier in the show, there was another moment like this where he had just killed all these assassins on behalf of his mother, because he wanted to protect his mother to gain her acceptance. Unfortunately, that didn't end up working, and he's angry and he's hurt, and he's out yelling, and he's destroying these little rock wish towers, or whatever you call them. And in this moment, Heisu actually isn't afraid of him, and she even asks, like, when he says, don't you understand? I killed people. Like, why aren't you afraid of me? And she just looks at him and just says, like, then tell me why you killed them. And this really shocks him, and he doesn't really know how to respond to it, because it's like the first time someone didn't look at him like a monster. And then on top of that, later she tells him that she can relate to him and that she understands him and how he's feeling. And I think that was like the first time too that he realized there was something deeper to Heisu that interested him. Of course, at that point, I wouldn't say he had completely fallen in love with her yet, but that was definitely a big step that made him really take notice of Heisu and how she's different from others around him. So that was also a very beautiful and emotional scene as well, leading up to, of course, the scene when she touches his face. And I like how this works, because as we're talking about touching the face of their love interest, I really also think it has that meaning behind it of they're like the healer, because I do think Heisu is the healer of Wong So. And we see this in Reylo, of course. We've been saying it for a while, considering everything that goes on with them and their relationship as the movies progress, because we can basically say that Rey was the healer of Ben Solo's heart. And we can say the same thing with Katara and Zuko, at least for what was originally planned. They were originally going to be a couple until that got changed to Aang instead. But in that show, Katara was supposed to have been the healer of Zuko's heart. And of course, Haesu is the healer of Wong So's heart. And I know earlier in the beginning when we were talking about what makes a strong heroine, and I was going off about all the different attributes that made Haesu strong, even though she wasn't necessarily a warrior like Rey or Katara or some other female heroines we have right now. But I do like the fact that in the end, really, even though it's Wong So who's doing all the physical stuff saving Haesu, it's really Haesu who saves Wong So in the story because of how much pain that he was in and how much he was suffering and how much he had been hurt, because ultimately we know, at least how the story starts, is that he was supposed to have turned into this murderous king, or this bloody king who killed all of his brothers to acquire the throne. And I'm guessing that probably would have happened if Haesu had not entered his life. And I think that that's basically what was in store for him. But because Haesu went back in time and met him and got to know him and understood him and could relate to him and was patient and was so tender and loving to him, she loved him so much that pretty much it changed Wong So's destiny. And I do think that that's, again, what made Haesu so unbelievably strong, is that she just has this like endless amount of compassion. And I think that in the end, we have to realize that that's because love is the most powerful force in the universe, and it always will be. And I just think that that was what made their relationship just so beautiful. And yeah, so I also think that in a way Wong So saved Haesu in some ways as well, because I know that she had some abandonment issues with her own boyfriend in the beginning that betrayed her. And so it was, and of course with Wook, the eighth prince, who also abandoned her to basically die. But the one who came to save her, that showed that he would not abandon her, was Wong So. And I know that there were like other complications near the end that people debate with Wong So and his promises with Haesu. I'm not going to talk about that here. But I think that there was just so many complications that I don't think it was only just his fault. And anyway, so that's a discussion for a whole other time, but his heart was always loyal to Haesu. I know that for a fact. But yeah, so love is the most powerful force in the universe, and I just think that that's pretty much what happened, that she saved Wong So, and her love is what inspired him, and in the end, even though he lost her, he became a good king, a good and wise king in the end because of her influence. And I just think that that was just so awesome and very touching and moving, that he loved her so much that it ended up actually changing his destiny. Anyway, so, and I also think, now that we're talking about healing and whatnot, I also want to point out that if you guys haven't listened to the Girls with Sabers podcast on YouTube, I strongly recommend it. They make some really great content, and they in the past actually went over a similar concept like this called the Healing Jedi. So if you haven't listened to that podcast, I know it came out a while ago, but it was a really good listen. I sometimes re-listen to their podcast just because I learn a lot and it just makes me feel good. So yeah, so if you're looking for a great positive Reylo podcast, that I would strongly recommend watching Girls with Sabers. They make some really awesome content. So shout out to Girls with Sabers. They're awesome. So back to Moon Lovers. I know that in the end, there is a lot of sadness and tragedy, of course, because Haesu dies. But in this moment, when we find out that she died, of course, I was really intrigued that they decided to have her cremated, to have her, instead of having her buried, that she had ashes. And this kind of reminded me of the fact that, even though this is not like in Asian mythology or anything, but in Greek mythology, there is a creature called a phoenix. and this creature basically will burst into flames and die and turn into ashes, but then it will be reborn again from its own ashes and rise out of its own ashes and be a beautiful bird once again. And so I kind of thought of that as the fact that even though Heisu died, she will live again and rise out of her own ashes. And ultimately, that is what happens because she is reincarnated over again as Heisu. Not Heisu. She's reincarnated again as Gohajin. And even though the ending strongly hints at something happy later, because it starts out with Jimong telling Wang So that Heisu was not from this world, and that if you think back on it, you will realize it from all the instances and events that took place. And after he leaves and walks away, Wang So turns around and notices that there is an eclipse happening, and it looks just like the one at the very beginning of the series. And it's almost as if he remembers seeing this same eclipse, because it was during this time that he saw this eclipse that he met Heisu shortly after, which was his true love. And then, of course, later in the modern world, we get Heisu, or Gohajin. She sees the painting of him standing there alone, and of course she apologizes for leaving him alone there, because even though he was a wise and good king in the end, she's sad to see that he ended up living alone for the rest of his life, at least in the Goryeo dynasty anyway. And then of course we get Wang So thinking back about Heisu, and he remembers he remembers her telling him something really interesting that furthers the idea that he knew all along that she was from a different world, which is when he says, "What are you afraid of? What are you hiding?" And she just says that it would be great, that it would be so great if we met in another world and at another time, and if that could be, I wouldn't fear anything, and I could truly freely love you. And that's when we finally get our last shot of Wang So, when he turns to the camera. And I honestly think this was really brilliant. I really think that this was a brilliant shot, because he turns around as if he's looking straight at Heisu, who was looking at the painting earlier. So now it's almost as if they're looking at each other. And he says basically to her, "If we are not from the same world, I will find you, my Su." And I thought that was, oh my gosh, that was such an emotional scene to see that happen and see him say that, because I know he means it. He would basically do anything he could to be with her again. And basically this last scene of the show heavily hints that at one point or one day Wang So was going to see her again, because again, this show is heavily based around, the whole idea of reincarnation, because we already have Heisu being reincarnated as Gohajin. So I think that we can assume that Wang So one day he'll die, but then he'll be reincarnated again in the modern world. And I think that that's basically what this hints at, is that at some point Gohajin is going to meet modern day Wang So, and he will find her, and they will get that second chance at love, and they'll be able to end up together this time. And so I know that technically I can take that in my heart and know that for myself, but let's be honest, you guys, it's just not enough. There needs to be more. Like, this is just killing me and making me crazy. I can't believe that there wasn't a season 2 for this show. It's just so phenomenally good. It's so deep and so layered. And the music was great, the characters are great, the romance was great. It was just so passionate, and oh my gosh, I can't believe it. I can't believe that there was no season 2, and I really think that we seriously need to see what it would look like if they were to meet together in modern times. Like, really, I'm serious. Like, it's driving me crazy. It's keeping me up at night, and it's just not enough. I know I can take comfort in knowing in my heart that everything is okay, because he promises her he'll see her again and he'll be reincarnated, because that's what the whole show is basically based around. But no, I have to see it. I can't I can't just sit here and just be okay with that as the ending for the rest of my life. Like, this is... Oh my gosh. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm fine. I can calm down. Not really. But anyway, as a side note, in the Chinese drama, which I know that I said I wouldn't talk about really in this video, but I do want to point out one thing with the Chinese drama that I thought was really nice that I wish was included in the K-drama, which was the fact that at the very, very end, she goes to the museum or the gallery, and she sees the modern day fourth prince. And as they look at each other deep in their eyes, of course, she has her memories back. Just like Hasu did in the K-drama, it's the heroine who gets her memories back. And the fourth prince, the modern day fourth reincarnated prince, looks at her, and he doesn't have his memories back, but he does look at her as if he knows her somehow and even asks, do we know each other? And that's kind of where it ended with the first season anyway of the Chinese drama. And I think that if that's all that ever was, I mean, at least we know that we get to see him and that he recognizes that he feels like he knows her somehow. I think that was kind of enough. That was enough to give you an idea everything was going to be okay, that you at least get to see him. And actually, the funny thing is they did film this scene in the Korean drama, but they ended up cutting it for some reason. I'm not entirely sure why, but he was supposed to show up at the art gallery when she's crying in front of the painting, and he's supposed to offer her a handkerchief to dry her tears. So I'm not entirely certain why they cut it. If I had to make a guess, my guess is perhaps since they were planning on having a season 2 originally, that they may have cut it because they wanted to have that first meeting between modern day Wang So and Go Ha Jin or / Hasu for the first time in the second season. I think that they might have wanted to save that first meeting for the second season. But unfortunately, the ratings weren't very high for this show when it first aired, which is something I'll never understand because it was an amazing show. So I'm kind of angry at Korea right now for not giving it higher ratings because if they just sucked it up, we would have had a really awesome season 2. Okay, I'm sorry. I've talked about this so much. But anyway, I'm just saying that it's just really a shame that we didn't get to see this deleted scene. And I hope as a minimum someday we get to see this deleted scene. Like hopefully they release it so we can watch it for ourselves. But yeah. But the good news is I do think that Scarlet Heart Ryeo has actually gained a ton of popularity over the past 4 years since it aired. And there have been some Asian dramas that they don't air a second season until many years later. So who knows? I think that there could be a chance that we may get a season 2, just like the Chinese drama. And anyway, so these are the first and second seasons of the Chinese drama. I wish I could have showed this earlier, but obviously the season 2 would have been a big spoiler, since of course the season 2 ends up taking place in the modern world instead of in the ancient world. So I really hope that we someday get the same thing for Moon Lovers, Scarlet Heart Ryeo, because it was such a great show and it really deserves more recognition. And I just hope and pray every day that we get it. And and I hope that we get to see what that looked like and we get to see them have that happily ever after that they deserve. But anyway, so this comes back to the fact that I'm going to be begging you guys again to help try to get this show recognized, because it is very similar to Reylo and it has that similar excitement and passion and that yin and yang and all that good stuff. And of course a redemption arc of a dark prince who needs to be healed with the love of a woman that he loves. And anyway, it has all that great stuff in it. And I figured this needed to be a show that was shared with the Reylo community. And I hope you guys all enjoyed the show as much as I did. And I really hope that you're motivated to see a season 2 like I am, because we really need your help. And I know that the Reylo community is this really awesome community that has some great discussions, and I feel like we're pretty vocal, and I think we could really use that energy and that and your voices to help moon lovers. And I know that we were really upset with what happened in, of course, The Rise of Skywalker with Reylo, and it was really, for a lot of us, I'm not saying all of us, but I would say for most of us in the Reylo community, we were really upset and disappointed and heartbroken with what happened at the end of that. And I know in Moon Lovers that it's also very sad at the end, but at least the writing makes sense. It's not like it was just a bunch of fan service thrown at the screen where everything was messed up in the end. And I know that there's a lot of rumors as to what happened with The Rise of Skywalker, but I'm not really talking about the rumors or any of like the articles that people claim that have come out. I'm just talking about the fact that when I went and saw the movie speaks for itself, because it clearly didn't make sense with all the other films that came before it. And second, it was so fan servicey. How could I not notice that they most likely changed the film to please like a lot of angry vocal fans? So anyway, I guess that does in a way, even though that kind of sucks, it kind of proves that if you're really vocal about something, then I guess they hear you. So anyway, but I just want to point out that maybe instead of being sad and negative and upset over what happened with Reylo, if there's a way that you guys can channel that energy into Wang So and Jesus' relationship, Sosu, then I think that all that energy that you would have put into Reylo, and I'm not saying don't be into Reylo anymore, of course be into Reylo, and I still ship Reylo, but I just think that this would be another great thing to put your energy in to try and help this show get a season 2. Like, try to do things that lets the company know, like, look, hey, we really love this show and we want to see a season 2 and we are going to fight for it. And I think they'll take notice of it if enough of us do that. So yeah, so again, I'm begging you guys, the Reylo community, please, 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 please jump on board with the rest of us moon lovers and try to get this series a season 2. And really, I hope this video that I'm making makes a lot of people want to have more discussions about this show, that more people will be talking about it, that I hope that it'll get some more fans with podcasts talking about moon lovers. I don't know, maybe that's hoping for too much, but I don't care. I love this show too much to just leave it alone and just hope and pray that something happens. I don't think you can only just hope and pray. I think you have to also do something, like, and have some action about it. I know one idea that's been going around in the fandom is people are suggesting to send in a request to Netflix, mainly because Netflix has been teaming up with a lot of companies in Korea, and they're actually putting a lot of Korean dramas on Netflix now, and they're available here in the West now too, and they're really popular. So anyway, I think that would be an awesome outlet to try to spread the word and get them and let them know that we want a season 2. So if you have a Netflix account, send in a request to Netflix for Moon Lovers Scarlet Heart Ryeo. And if you have an Instagram account, maybe try to send Netflix a message on Instagram about how much you love the show and how we want a season 2, and how there's a lot of people that love the show too, and that there's a huge market for it, so they'll be motivated to make it. The same is true with NBC Universal. They were actually a producer for Moon Lovers, so that would be another place that you could write a message to them saying that, hey, we love the show and we think it needs a season 2, and there's a huge market for it because there's a huge fan base for this show, and you can message them on Facebook actually. So in the future, I'm going to be making another video on more details on how you can do this and spread the word. But anyway, I just wanted to introduce that idea for now. But yeah, I really hope that this video inspired you to spread the word to other Reylo fans and do some action and try to get this show recognized and be pretty vocal about it. And as well as the Zutara fans, because I know that, it was upsetting that Zuko and Katara didn't quite end up together in Avatar, but because there's so many similarities again with Wang So and Jesus to Zutara, I think that this would be another great show to put in a lot of energy and try to see their relationship continue in a season 2. So yeah, so I hope that you guys will be inspired to spread the word. Please spread the word. This show needs your love and it needs the recognition, and Haesoo and Wongso deserve a happily ever after in season 2. So together, let us help Moon Lovers Scarlet Heart Ryeo season 2 happen, because it needs to happen, you guys. It does. It has to. Anyway, but I think that I've ranted about this far enough, and I think you guys have gotten my point. So I'm just gonna say now that I'm so thankful to anyone who watched this video. I hope you like, comment, and subscribe. And I'd love to make more content on Moon Lovers Scarlet Heart Ryeo. Maybe in the past, or not in the past, I'm sorry, maybe in the future I will make another video with Moon Lovers and Reylo and Zutara, considering that there's just so many similarities and I may have like forgotten a few details. But anyway, because there's just so many similarities. But if not, I'm probably just going to stick to Moon Lovers Scarlet Heart Ryeo. So stay tuned for that, and I'm really excited, and I really hope you guys love this video. So thanks, and see you next time.